Good afternoon once again. My job is very easy. I am here to introduce to you our next speaker. Our next speaker is not just anyone. He is a renowned and professional in what he does. He runs a radio program and the channel called Fatherland, and he is also an in-law of ours, married to our sister. Very in-depth in what he does. He knows a lot about Biafran history, about Nigerian history, and he combines the two to bring out the truth about what actually happened and what is happening. He has written a book and will tell you all about that. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dele Ogun.
All right, whilst they're dealing with the technicalities, let me declare my interest in this issue. As a Yoruba nationalist, people may be wondering what is a Yoruba nationalist doing at an IPOD event. Let me explain the connection. It's been touched upon. My wife is your sister. So I'm here to say due to my Ogo. Beyond that, yes, it's just that single stuff.
Okay.
This book that I'm holding in my hand is my mother-in-law's story. The story of a Biafran War survivor. As a publisher and an author, I helped her to put the story together such that the story would not be lost. It's titled The Life and Times of Mrs. B.E.A.D is the full title. Just very briefly, the autobiography of a Biafran War survivor featuring bullets, bombs, and starvation. Born in 1941 in eastern Nigeria, in the middle of the Second World War, Mrs. Evelyn Enna's story takes us through the years of hope and glory in eastern Nigeria when Christianity is first brought to her Igbo people by missionaries, together with education and the promise of a better future, crowned by an encounter with Queen Elizabeth II on the royal tour. But then the sky is darkened dramatically at independence, as her Igbo people are driven into a secession attempt, which is quashed by the most brutal war on the African continent, followed by post-war demonization. That's the life and times of Mrs. Evelyn, and I have a few copies here for those who may be interested. But I would like to give some historical context to what I've heard so far. I know a speaker was supposed to speak about Nigeria and how it came together, and she wasn't able to make it, so as a historian, I will explain it to you as briefly as possible, because it's very relevant to the experience that your people went through. You must understand the context in which all of this thing happened. Nigeria was Britain's project. It was a commercial project. It was conceived on the back of the ending of one crime against humanity, which is the slave trade. It was in the wake of the abolition of the slave trade, where they were taking our people out of our lands. They're now, having got to the point, I won't go into the detailed reasons for abolition, but rest assured, it was not some humanitarian awakening. The reason it wasn't a humanitarian exercise is this: colonization, an even greater evil, followed immediately on the back of the end of the slave trade. So abolition of the slave trade was 1807. Abolition of slavery was 1833. And the colonization process started in between. So Sierra Leone was the first base that was taken in West Africa, from which they were going to carry out the colonization project. And Sierra Leone was colonized in 1808. So abolition of slave trade, 1807, colonization of Sierra Leone as a launch pad for the colonization of West Africa, 1808. So the British were based in Sierra Leone, the French were based in Senegal, right next door. This is where the project was going to take off. The history of Nigeria that I wrote, titled A Fatherless People. People often ask me, why did you call it A Fatherless People? The explanation is this: we had fathers. Each of the 371 ethnic groups, nations, out of which Nigeria was constructed, had their fathers. But in order, just like a farmer operates, if you want to plant your own seed, you must clear the land first. And so the fathers that we had to be cleared out, one by one. Those who were prepared to partner with the colonial project were left in place. Those who were not prepared to partner with the colonial agenda were either killed or removed and sent into exile. That was the process by which the leaders and the leadership of all the 371 ethnic groups were effectively decapitated, and we were rendered fatherless. So that was stage one of the process. That is how they got the so-called treaties of protection. The greatest misnomer that you've ever heard. They weren't protecting anything. These were treaties of colonization, drafted by lawyers in the English language, that our people didn't even understand the language. With a gun to the head, you will sign. So this is how the treaties were extracted. And then the next stage of the exercise is, what are we going to do with all these territories that we've now accumulated by way of these treaties? We shall amalgamate them and make them one entity. This is where the Nigerian concept came from. Now, initially, there were two Nigerias. There was southern Nigeria and there was northern Nigeria. So as of 1900, you had southern Nigeria and you had northern Nigeria. 1906 is when southern Nigeria was actually united. East and west were amalgamated. This is very important background to what then happens afterwards. So you had one south as of 1906, and you had one north as of that date. The next stage in the calendar is 1914. The decision to amalgamate southern Nigeria with northern Nigeria to make one Nigeria, in theory. That amalgamation took place without consultation with any Nigerians. There's a lot of misinformation out there alleging that 5 Nigerians signed the Treaty of Amalgamation. I can tell you authoritatively, there was no Treaty of Amalgamation. The amalgamation took effect by way of a decree, an edict, signed by King George V of Britain, signed at Windsor Castle. The authority was given in 1913 and it took effect on 1st of January 1914. So there we had our one Nigeria in theory. What then happened? The next key stage was the greatest April Fool's joke that's ever been played. Did I say greatest? Let me change that word. The most sinister April Fool's joke that's ever been played on human beings. 1st of April 1939 is your relevant date. That is the date when the then governor of Nigeria, Bodilon, you know where Bodilon Avenue in Lagos is named after? Ikoyi. He, at that point, 1st of April 1939, decided it would be a good thing to have Eastern Nigeria, or Eastern region and Western region, whilst leaving the much bigger Northern Nigeria as a single block. Why do you think he did that? It's as simple as that. Cut the one south into two halves and leave the one north as a single unit. So whilst they were amalgamating and unifying the north, they were dividing the south, knocking heads together, laying the foundations for heads to be knocked together. And this is where your people first really come into the picture, because no part of Nigeria is more brilliant than any other part. We're all the same. What happens is that opportunities arise at different times. Because Igbo land was not coastal, in contrast to Yoruba land, where there are coastal parts. So when the missionaries were coming in fact, even before the missionaries, the slave trade, it was those with access to the coast. That was the first contact. So when they were now in the wake of abolition of the slave trade, sending the missionaries, because those were their advanced guard. If they came with weapons saying they were coming to colonize, of course they would not be able to walk in so easily. But if they were coming in with the sign of the cross in the name of peace, then of course we, being the genteel, generous people that we are, we let them in. So the first kiss, first colonial kiss, was with the coastal communities. This is why Abeokuta in particular plays such a prominent role in the history of Nigeria, even within Yoruba land. This is why all the presidents that Yoruba land has ever produced are all Egba people from Abeokuta's side, because that's where the missionaries first set their base. Abeokuta was then used as the base to conquer Lagos, a convenient offshore island to the mainland. This has always been the colonial template, as Cape Town is to South Africa, Hong Kong is to China, so Lagos was to the mainland of Nigeria. With that missionary penetration came education in inverted commas. And this is why the Western region was producing graduates at quite an early stage. Everybody knows the story of Ajayi Crowther at Oxford University by 1850. The interland peoples were still further down the road as far as the contact was concerned. The conquest of Igbo land did not start until around 1901 also. Even the conquest of the North did not start until 1903. Yes, they had declared a protectorate, but they had not yet taken political, military control of these territories. So what then happened? Going back to our 1939 date, this is when they now, to knock Igbo and Yoruba heads together, they were fast-tracking the development of your people. This is why, even though the Yoruba had a head start, for the reasons that I've explained, you overtook them rapidly, because they are now fast-tracking education opportunities in the East. But notice, whereas most of the Yoruba were studying in England, Azikiwe were being sent to the US to make sure that the two shall not meet and become friends and colleagues. These are the subtle strategies that were used, but with an agenda. And the agenda has always been Nigeria. The agenda is simple. It must be kept together. And whoever attempts to leave will be the one who will pay the price. They actually expressly warned the North. They warned B.E.A.D that when these things fall apart, it is those who control the guns, not those who control the pens, that will rule. And they warned them, make sure you're not the ones who say you're leaving. Now those tip-offs were given confidentially. If it had been thrown out for everybody to hear, everybody will have positioned themselves. There was an agenda from the beginning that when they left, because bear in mind, they did not want to leave. Who wants to leave a commercial enterprise that is so profitable in circumstances where we, the indigents, did not have the weaponry? They made sure that we had been disarmed. We do not have the weaponry to push them out. So you might ask, where did the push come from? I know America today is big and bad, but ironically, it was the Americans that gave them notice to quit. The detail of that is in my book, A Fabulous People, but in very briefly, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who, in a standoff with Winston Churchill, when Churchill was trying to persuade America under Franklin Delano Roosevelt to come into the war against Nazi Germany, Roosevelt told him, we saved your empire in the First World War. Young Americans died in that war. I'm not sending young Americans to die yet again in order to save the British Empire. The empire has to go. This was then reflected in what is called the Atlantic Charter, which was published in August 1941. That was the commitment to self-determination. So the Americans were now encouraging groups to make the move. But the British had no intention of letting go of a good thing. It's common sense. If they're not pushing you out, why would you let it go? And remember, they knew the oil was there. I know they tell us that the oil was discovered in Uludiri in 1958. Where was it?
58.
58? Such a nonsense. The oil had been discovered 1908. 1908. By 1909, we were already producing 2 million barrels per day. But of course, because Nigeria belonged to them, they had no duty to disclose. And so that knowledge, the awareness shaped what was to happen once they left? Who was going to take over? This was an issue of succession planning. And their decision was that it was not the ones who they had educated in the same way as their own children are educated. Those ones who they had Christianized. Those ones who they had given the Western education. It was to be the North. And so a letter had been written in confidence, as I say, to Balewa, which I do disclose inside the book. So that is then independence. What happens next? You see, the free region structure that we had, it was touched on earlier when they were shouting Araba. 1954 was when they were shouting Araba in the north. Why were they shouting Araba? It is because in 1953, the audacious Southerners, the nationalists, had moved the motion for independence and was effectively serving notice that the Brits had to leave by 1956. So the partners now, the junior partners in the exercise, were now screaming that they wanted to pull out. So a constitutional conference was quickly called in London in order to forestall the breakup of Nigeria. Now you will have seen the clips featuring Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna. I do not blame them. I do not blame Sardauna. He was actually very open. He did not want anything to do with the South at all. And it was because of his action that the British arranged that free regional structure with a loose federation that we had at independence. But that was merely to pacify. It was never going to be the final stop. The final stop was always going to be the unification, the unitary Nigeria. And this is where the so-called Igbo coup came into it. That was merely the excuse to return us back to the unitary arrangement, which was always the agenda. But the Igbos had to be scapegoated. That was the plan. And that's why the BBC were very quick to shout Igbo coup. And that label has stuck ever since. But we've done the research and we've done the investigation, and the facts tell us otherwise. But you know how a lie is in relation to the truth? The lie is out of sight before the truth begins to seep through. So that now brings us to the war. As I was preparing for this presentation, in fact, Justice said, what are you going to speak about? I said, well, I want to deal with the most difficult issue of all in terms of Igbo-Yoruba relationships. The economic side of that war, the blockade, the starvation policy. So when I Googled, starvation, Biafra, our law. And what came up? It was an article, you'll find it on the internet, titled "A Diary of the Genocide Against Eastern Nigeria," compiled by one Professor Herbert Ekwe, I think. Ekwe. First quotation from that article. I want to see no Red Cross, no Caritas, no World Council of Churches, no Pope, no missionary, no UN delegation. I want to prevent even one Igbo from having even one piece to eat before their capitulation. we shoot at everything that moves. And when our troops march into the center of Igbo territory, we shoot at everything, even things that do not move. Who was that? Adekunle. All right, Benjamin Adekunle, Commander, 3rd Marine Commander Division, Nigerian Army, to French radio reporter. Here's the next one. All is fair in war, and starvation is one of the weapons of war. I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat in order for them to fight harder. Who was that? And our final one. It, i.e. mass starvation, is a legitimate aspect of war. Any guesses?
Go on.
No. Anthony Enahu. Now, do you see a pattern there? What part of Nigeria are all those commentators from? And which part of the South in particular? Western region? Is that not a strange, curious thing? You would have thought this war was between the Western region and the Eastern region. But all the actors, the main spokespersons, are all from the Western region. Do you begin to suspect something is going on here? But bear with me. This is why I've put this image up there. I hope you can see it. Britain's 2 imperial wars in Africa. One is the Boer War, and the other is the Biafran War. What do they have in common? Both were wars of independence. The Boer War, the second one, which is the critical one, 11th of October 1899 to 31st of May 1902. It lasted 2 years, 7 months, and 20 days. Biafra War, 6th of July 1967 to 15th of January 1970. It lasted 2 years, 6 months, and 9 days. In both cases, Britain was victorious. The Boers did not get their independence. I'm assuming that people know what I'm talking about when I speak of the Boers. This is in South Africa. Yeah. Because South Africa was a Dutch colony first, before the British effectively edged them out. And part of the last phase of taking control of South Africa was to break the Boer resistance. The Boers said, look, we've taken Cape Town. We're going to move inland, into the hinterland. We want this space to be our space, where we enjoy independence. You can have the rest of South Africa. But it wasn't to be, because they never allow 2 powers to coexist in the same space. The Boers had to be defeated and come under British suzerainty. This was the origin of the dot in the circle strategy. You know that phrase? Mm-hmm. The dot in the circle. When you look at that map, those 2 maps, do you see the parallels and similarities? Mm-hmm. That you encircle them, you blockade them as a key part of the war strategy. So the Boers had been hemmed in by various British territorial acquisitions, while the Igbos had been isolated by poisoning the minds of those all around them. The scapegoating exercise. Now, part of that scapegoating and poisoning, remember the Willings Commission report? Yeah? That was a report that was commissioned. What are we going to do about the agitation by the minorities? The date of that report was 29th of July 1958. That report said, no new states, leave them as they are. But what it had done, it had earmarked the south-south areas, the ones surrounding Igbo land, for special treatment. So as in the so-called independence constitution, there was actually embedded in that document a special development scheme targeted and focused on those south-south areas to the exclusion of other areas in the east. No equivalence in the west. It was just earmarked for those areas. This is why Isaac Boer, the 12-day revolution, this is why it happened. Because what had been promised to them and what was being delivered to them was now being taken away. Because Balewa was actually the chair of that initiative to fast-track the development, the economic development of those areas. Note that date, 29th of July, 1958. We then move back to South Africa, so we can see the parallels. It was as a letter that was written by one Lord Milner to the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Joseph Chamberlain, back on November the 9th, 1899. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read the whole section, but here's an interesting phase. Bear in mind, in context of this Boer War. With all the forces we may be able to put into the field, it will be a slow business wearing out the enemy. As long as the back door at Lorenzo Marquez hold line with Portugal is open, I suppose European complications might prevent our taking the bold line with Portugal. Otherwise, it will be far better to say to her, be our friend out and out, or be our enemy. In the latter case, we could blockade, which would soon finish the business. Now, I haven't got a pointer, but you can see the Portuguese East Africa bit there. That was the outlets that the Boers had. That they were saying if they could blockade that, the troubles would be over very quickly. But this is a more interesting passage, the next one. This was the response from Chamberlain to Lord Milner. November the 7th, 1899. Personally, I think we're right not to seize foodstuffs. One, because I cannot believe in the possibility of starving the Boers, or indeed of seriously hampering them by such an operation. Secondly, because we risk trouble with other powers. Thirdly, because we should be making a precedent which would certainly be quoted against us in a European war. The majority of the cabinet agreed with this view. So the point is this: starvation had been considered to be used in that, the dot in the circle. It had been considered as far back as 1899, but was ruled out. You may then wonder, why was it not ruled out in the Biafra? Let us assume for a moment, that the starvation policy was indeed the brainchild of those Southwesterners that I mentioned, Awolowo, Adekunle, and Nahru. As the conventional narrative would have us believe. Why did the British not rule it out? If they had ruled it out in relation to the Boer War in 1899, and they keep records, why was it not ruled out? they cannot say they did not have the influence over the Nigerian government so to do. After all, they were their main weapons supplier. This is why the study of history is important, because so long as you're left with second-hand narrative and not the real knowledge as to what is going on, you will forever be facing the wrong way. And it's happening on both sides. My Yoruba people pointing to the Igbos, my in-laws pointing at my people, like Tom and Jerry, always at each other's throats, whilst everybody's getting on with things. Now I ask you to note the date of that Willings Commission report. Remember? 29th of July, 1958. Does anybody remember when the currency was changed from pounds to naira during the war?
29th of January.
Don't cheat, because I've told you. You see, 29th of January, 1968. And who announced the policy? Our Lord. Are you beginning to see something going on? Yes? Are you beginning to see what is going on? That April Fool's thing from 1939 being played again and again and again. Change of currency, that's right, 29th of January 1968. But it's interesting, this is the beauty of history, because if you read well enough, you may find clues to what is really going on. There's a book that I came across that's titled Aftermath, Life in the Fallout of the Third Reich, 1945 to 1955, written by one Harold Jan. This is where you find the origin of the change of currency. This is in relation to Nazi Germany at the end of the war, to wipe them out, to finish them off. The change of currency, and guess what else? The equivalent of the £20 policy. Oh yes. Now I'll read the passage to you. It's very brief. The first law of the reform of the German currency promulgated by the military governments of Great Britain, the United States, and France will go into effect on June the 20th. The old German currency is hereby invalidated. The new currency will be the Deutschmark, which will be divided into 100 Deutsch Pfennigs. The old money, the Reichsmarks, the Rentenmark, and Mark notes issued in Germany by the Allied military authorities will become invalid on June the 21st. The Germans have been waiting for months for this moment. There had been a lot of talk about a currency devaluation. No one trusted the Reichsmark anymore, and everyone who still had enough swapped them for tangible goods. Apart from the millions who were starving, there were any number of Germans who had more Reichsmarks than they could spend, and who led a life of officially illegal luxury, purchased at astronomical prices. Doubts about the Reichsmark meant that traders had held back more and more goods, hoarding for the day when there would be a stable currency with better prices in the future. In the early summer of 1948, the shops were very nearly empty, because rumors about the coming D-Day were constantly spreading. Now the time had come. Throughout the day, listeners to BFN, that was a radio station, would learn more about the procedure. Everyone would receive an allowance of 40 Deutschmarks, which they could collect on Sunday the 20th of July at the ration card issuing offices in exchange for 60 Reichsmarks. A month later, they will receive an additional 20 Deutschmarks in exchange for the same number of Reichsmarks. Any Reichsmarks beyond the first 60 will be practically worthless. 1,000 Reichsmarks would have a value of 65 Deutschmarks. So that's how they were financially leveled. That was the origin of our £20 policy. You see, we used to think that Awolowo was a genius, some devilish genius who came up with this master plan. Well, it's all in the war precedent books. They have used it against Nazi Germany. And who remembers finally the abandoned properties decree? Remember that one? Yeah. Do you remember the date? No. Shall I tell you? Please. Guess what day of the month? 29th? Everybody 29th? 29th it is. 29th of September, 1979. And who was the culprit? Obasanjo. Again. You remember April Fools? Who was pushed forward to accept the surrender as if it was a war between Yoruba and Igbos? Obasanjo. So, maybe now my final point, because there's much that could be said. What is this sin about the 29th? We've seen 3 29th dates: abandoned properties decree, change of currency, Willings Commission report.
The massacres.
This guy gets too excited. I put make sure that the audience is with me. What are the other 29th dates? You must never forget, you as Biafrans must never forget. First round of programs, 29th of May, 1966. Yep. Second round, 29th of July, 1966. Third round, 29th September, 1966. Can you see the significance of the 29th in your experience, in your trauma? And where does that 29th then come from? Where does that 29th come from? 29th of May, 1453 is where it dates from. It was a day on which the forces of Islam conquered what was then the Christian capital, the new Christian capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, which became Istanbul. 29th, 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 signature day. So wherever you see it, you see the signs of what is really going on. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for the opportunity.
Now, we're going to go into quick questioning of those brilliant talk we had from Dele Ogun, and he has to tell us how much money we're going to pay for the book. That one about the about the history. Okay, I learned a lot. I don't know. Now let's have some quick fire questions from what we've heard today about the history. I think someone said if we learned anything from history, because we don't learn anything from history. Okay. First question, please. Let's be quick.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. After listening to lectures, I had mixed feelings, felt depressed, I was impressed, I was happy that the history has not been wiped out. But what stuck in my mind was the 29th of September. The question that prompted me to say, can I ask the question is, do we have any clue what 29th of September this year will be, given the significance of 29th of September? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Since I came to an understanding of the significance of the 29th, I always watch our unfolding political events with special focus on the 29th. So I do not have a crystal ball to be able to say to you, come the 29th of September this year, this is going to happen. All I can say is that on the basis of the events that have happened on the 29th, and it's not just the 6 that I've mentioned in the book, you'll see the chronology, and you'll be able to identify all the events, even the declaration of the state of emergency in the Western region in 1962 was the 29th of May 1962. So it's not just events happening to the East, it is significant events in the political calendar because it's become a good luck day that critical events then happen. So I can't say what will happen 29th of September. I did spot that the PDP convention, the PDP convention, when we looked at the calendar, we noticed that the PDP convention was slated for the 29th of the month. And it was very clear that it should have been the turn of the East within PDP. The zoning arrangement was very clear. It should have been the turn of the East. But what happened? That happened. So no crystal ball, but it's an important day to look out for. But now you know, and my people are beginning to listen as well. They were feeling the accusations that were being thrown at them in the same way as you, my in-laws, were feeling what appeared to be the hatred that was coming from the other side and the refusal to partner. But we now know that there is a higher force, there was a play, a darker force, I shouldn't call it higher force, a darker force that was at play, making sure that the two sides don't come together. But through those two books that I've drawn your attention to, and the other one that I must draw your attention to, is this one. It's not written by me. You will have heard the name, Harold Smith. Not all Britons hated us. There were good ones amongst them. And one of the best amongst them was this gentleman, Harold Smith, who saw what was happening, who was threatened that if he spoke out and disclosed what was going on, that he would never get another job in his life. And this Oxford graduate, whose colleagues were members of parliament and prime ministers, never got another job after the age of 33. Why? Because he blew the whistle. How they rigged the independence elections to put the North in power. And in particular, how that now led to the Biafra crisis. So, we do have friends amongst them. We must never assume that they are all party to the conspiracy that has put our people and our children on this trajectory. We must find the good ones amongst them. Just as we know that there are good people amongst my people in the West, and we know there are good people amongst your people in the East. But the bridge has to rest upon truth. No dodging, no ducking. Whatever was done, bring it out. Let us understand it. Let's put it in its context. So yes, starvation happened. And yes, those comments were made. But you now leave this room with a better understanding of what was really going on. And I always have a principle. Each one, teach one. It's not how many of you are in this room or watching on Zoom. It's how many others you could spread the knowledge to. Because the faster we get that understanding, our tribulations will be over. The only thing that they fear is our coming together. And this opportunity to speak today is the beginning of that process. So I salute all of you.
Thank you very much. We've got one more, because of the time. One more, we can add some more when we generated more space.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful presentation. I have one question, and the other one is just like a direction. One of the questions is, your books, how do we get it? Can we buy it electronically or face-to-face? So how do we buy the book? That's number one question. Number two question is that when you talk about the missionaries coming to the Yoruba land because of the coastal region, there's this view by a lot of people saying that Igbo people are not coastal region, and you also quoted the Williams Commission. In one of the Williams Commission, he called specifically Port Harcourt an Igbo city. That's number one. And number two is, having grown up in Aba, I know that Azumili River is about 25 nautical miles to Atlantic Ocean, more than any other ocean in Nigeria, in fact in Africa. But this notion of tagging Igbo people, not a coastal region, I think I want to point out to that, so that we start correcting this narrative, because that's a lie. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Let me deal with the easier point first, which is the cost of the books and the availability. I do have copies of some of the books here, so if you want a signed copy, most of them are £10. The history of Nigeria is more expensive, it's £25, but that was the work of 25 years of research. But the other ones are all £10. And if you're not able to buy today, they are available on the internet, on Amazon. So they are available on Amazon. As regards your second point, as to whether Igbo land is coastal in the context that I used it, what you have to, I don't dispute the point. You see, much of the labeling was part of the agenda to create that narrative, and sometimes lands, take for example Ilori. Ilori is Yoruba land, but it was put in the north. That's part of what was going on. They will take territory knowing that these were Igbo peoples in those lands, and they will call it something else. That's part of what was going on. But in the context that I was using it, you see, when they were coming in to colonize, they're looking for the points of easiest access. And so they're coming down that coast. And so you can see that Lagos will be an immediate candidate, just like Hong Kong in relation to China, and Cape Town in relation to South Africa. These were supposed to be launch pads, because how long could they stay on their vessels and their ships? They needed a land base. And so Calabar, for example, got earlier contact. Missions were established there. The arrival of the missions in Igbo land is actually covered in my mother-in-law's book. It came at a much later stage after the Arachuku War, etc. Okay?
Thank you very much. Okay, no more questions. Because of time.
The importance of the 29th day to the Caliphate. The overarching theme is that the 29th day of the calendar month, and the 29th of May, in particular, is viewed as a day of great portent by the Caliphate in their relationship with the East and the West. It becomes clearer when you group the dates. 29th of June 1951, the Macpherson Constitution comes into force. 29th of January 1952, the first sitting of the new House of Representatives. 29th of September 1957, the Lancaster House Constitutional Conference. 29th of May 1962, a state of emergency was declared in the Western region. 29th of May 1966, the first round of pogroms in the north against the Igbos. 29th of July 1966, the second round of pogroms against the Igbos and counter-coup. 29th of September 1966, the third round of pogroms against the Igbos. 29th of January 1968, Awolowo announces a change of Nigerian currency. 29th of July 1975, Major General Gowon was overthrown in a military coup by Murtala Muhammad. 29th of September 1979, Obasanjo Gazettes, Abandoned Properties, Decree No. 90 of 1979. 29th of May 1999, General Obasanjo becomes president. 29th of April 2021, INEC announced the date of the 2023 presidential election. 29th of June 2021, Nnamdi Kanu was rearrested and armed men attacked Sunday Igboho's residence. Several were killed, and Igboho's wife was abducted. 29th of May 2022, Atiku emerges as president-elect. Significance of the 29th day came from the 29th of May 1453, which marks the fall of Christian Constantinople to the Islamic Caliphate, Ottoman Empire. Join the change. From one Nigeria, the unity of the apple, to true federalism in the union of the orange.
Hi everyone, the Fatherland Group is a global network of Nigerians armed with a deep understanding of our past, present, and our future. Please like, follow, share our YouTube channel. Subscribe. Subscription on YouTube is actually free, so please do that and turn on your notifications. That way you'll be the first to know whenever we share new content. To learn more, please log on to the fatherlandgroup.org. fatherlandgroup.org. Thank you.